Anyway, let us begin today. We have Eddy Knasel, who today is going to speak to us on, which I think is quite a good title, offering a Quaker Voice on Radio Bristol. So, Eddy, when you're ready,
I'm going to share. I've done a presentation and I'm going to share the screen now. We'll just have to see how that goes. So I've titled my speech, and thank you very much for asking me, friends. It's been a very helpful thing to reflect on all this. I have been doing Thoughts of the Day on BBC Radio Bristol since 2005, which is longer than anybody else has been involved in the BBC Radio Bristol breakfast programme. And I sometimes remind the mayflies who come along and present it that that's the case. But it's been a good opportunity for me to think about it all, particularly as somewhere along the line, our area meeting nominations committee decided to make the thoughtist, which is a word that some people at Radio Bristol use, an official area meeting appointment. And my time actually runs out. I was appointed to do another 6 years. My time actually runs out at the end of this year. So nominations will have the task of finding someone to replace me. And so I'm hoping that in talking this through, saying what it's been like doing it and why I do it and all that sort of thing, things will be clearer about coming up with a spec for the kind of person that we need to invite to do it. So I'll carry on. What I'm going to do is I've got a presentation which I'll run through and try and leave a bit. I don't know what time you want to finish, Ray. You're muted, I'm afraid, Ray.
it's if we aim for about quarter to 10 to 12,
that would be lovely. Okay.
Then we can ask questions perhaps after.
Okay, well, I'll try and stop blethering by then. Okay. So I'll begin by saying what I'm planning to talk about. I'm going to start off by talking about what I'm going to call the slot, actually describing how BBC Radio Bristol do Thought for the Day and how it fits in with how they do things. I then want to talk about why I do it. It's not just ego, although I really do enjoy it. And I quite like the fact that I've been to Churches Together meetings where I've been introduced as, where someone has said, well, you've all heard him on the radio, so now you can actually see him, that sort of thing. There are some good, I think, admirable reasons why I've enjoyed doing it. And I'd like to give you a view of what's the kind of things I've talked about. So I'm going to talk about some of the topics that I've covered. And I probably will actually read out one of the scripts at that point. I also want to talk about how the slot has evolved, because over the years it has changed slightly, and it's changed a lot during the whole way we do it has changed completely during COVID. Could I begin by asking if you could raise a hand saying whether or not you've heard me on the radio? Okay, a few have. You'll get to hear it. If I read this script out, you'll get to hear what I'm like and that sort of thing. So it has evolved, as I say, particularly during COVID. You may or may not have noticed, Ray, but we don't go into the studio anymore. And that's made the job substantially more complicated in some ways. Then I want to talk about, it's also evolved because different presenters like it done slightly differently. And I'll need to talk about how there was a big change that happened when Emma Britton became the presenter, because she wanted the whole thing more tightly connected as part of the programme. So I'll talk about that. I then want to talk about the challenges involved in actually doing it, and then as a kind of beginning to write a job spec for the nominations department, nominations committee, I want to talk about what my reflection on what the role actually involves. The next thing I want to show you is I was actually persuaded to put my thoughts together into a book, which I published in about 2014. And I published it myself. And basically all the profits go to campaign against the arms trade. And it's worth it. I had another look at it when I was preparing this, and I think the introduction is very well written, and it's quite an interesting book anyway. So I will be referring to that at times. If any of you would like a copy, just let me know, and I'll let you have one. Yeah. About the Thought for the Day slot on Radio Bristol. It was originally a 300-word, which is basically 2.5 minutes of speaking slot on the breakfast show. And the idea, and various BBC programmes have Thought for the Day. The one I knew was Radio 4. They have one on Radio 2, which is a little bit different from how it's done on Radio 4. And the basic thought is that you take an item that's in that day's news and you put a spiritual twist on it. I should say that that they have a kind of coterie of people who provide thoughts for the day. Most of whom are Christian. Well, most of them are Christian, and most of them belong to faith groups. They don't all. It's not exclusively people who represent faith groups. When I first started, one of the biggest challenges was that it went out at quarter to eight in the morning. Now, I'm not that great at getting up in the morning. You actually had to be in the studio by 7:30, and that was a significant challenge. When I think most of you know that I had a stroke in 2009, which kept me out of action. I actually had a year when I didn't do Thought for the Day. When I came back in 2010, they moved the slot an hour later. So it now goes out at 8:45. And until COVID, the thing was you actually went into the studio and read your script out live then and there, which made it quite an integrated part of the programme. There was always an intention that there should be a little bit of interaction between you and the actual presenter. Now, this is a big thing we'll have to talk about as one of the challenges. The script has to be approved by a BBC editor the day before the broadcast. And I'll talk about the challenges of that when I get towards the end. So that's basically what I've been doing for the last really rather long time. I was asked to do it, I think, by our Quaker Life group. It's actually our friend Barbara Ryder rang me up during the middle of the day at one point and said, would you like to do Thought for the Day? And in fact, when I first heard Thought for the Day on Radio 4 a long time ago, I thought I'd love to do that. I mean, I hadn't had any religious connections at all in those days. I just thought, what a good thing to do. So it wasn't hard to twist my arm to do it. I do it for a number of reasons. Run through this. Sorry. Well, firstly, I see it. I do actually believe in outreach. I know not all Quakers do, but it's a great opportunity to share the Quaker values of peace, truth, simplicity, and equality. And also, I think the world needs to know more about Quakers. I think we represent a really important strand in the overall English faith story. And I found it is really important to let people know that we're still there. We're not just in the history books. I found that in particular when there was an exhibition of the Quaker tapestry in the cathedral. I think it was in the cathedral. And one or two of the people looking at it said to me, it's a shame there aren't any Quakers in Bristol anymore, isn't it? I think it's really quite important that the world knows we're there. Then there's technical stuff. I really enjoy the challenge of writing something with a message that's very tightly worded. I've done a lot of work, different kinds of work when I used to get paid for things, but I actually do regard myself as a bit of a wordsmith. And actually the business of writing to a tight word limit is quite technically quite interesting. And I really enjoy the teamwork aspect of it. I actually love joining the team at the BBC. And actually, you get treated very well by the BBC. You, of course, don't get paid. You do get expenses, which is a bit tokenistic. And we do, in fact, they do actually lay on a Christmas meal for us every year. And you get an opportunity to see the other people who do the thwarting. And at the back of my mind, there's always the possibility that one day maybe someone will be encouraged to come into a meeting to worship because they've heard what I said on the breakfast show. So those are the kind of reasons I do it. So I'll give you an idea of some of the things I actually talk about. These are all topics where the script is actually included in this book. So I've talked about the white poppy and its relationship to the red poppy. I talked about the Arab Spring. I've talked about royal weddings, and in particular, I've also talked about our commitment to equal marriage. And I did a number of thoughts of the day roundabout in 2014 about the anniversary of 1914, about the centenary of World War I. In particular, highlighting the role of conscientious objection in 1914, which of course, to a large extent, Quakers invented. And Britain was one of the first countries in the world where there were conscientious objectors. And one of the topics, these are all topics that I was taking out of the general news that was likely to be on the world news that day, or British news that day. I talked about the murder of drummer Lee Rigby, and I'll probably actually read that script out in a minute or two. I talked about the legacy of Edward Colston, and I'll come back to this later when I talk about the challenges. I've talked about settlement goods, meaning there was yearly meeting published a list of companies operating on the West Bank and selling their goods as being Israeli, with the view that friends might like to make a decision as to whether or not they wanted to boycott those companies. And I will talk about the challenges of talking about that on the radio, on the BBC a bit later. So I will, please don't, I mean, it would have been nice if I actually had a recording of this. I will give you my script for the murder of drummer Lee Rigby. I don't know if you remember that. It happened in May 2013. And I'll give you the background that I've written here in the book. On the afternoon of the 22nd of May, drummer Lee Rigby of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers was run down by a van. Two men ran out of the van and set about him with knives and a cleaver, hacking him to death. One of the attackers got a passerby to use his mobile phone to video his explanation of why drummer Rigby had been killed. ITN showed the film on their main news bulletin that evening. So the next morning I said, "Good morning, Steve," he was the presenter at the time. "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." I heard that phrase on Wednesday night when watching the news. It was, to say the least, chilling to see it used by someone whose hands literally were dripping with blood. The phrase appears in the books of many religions, including the Christian Bible. But of course, Jesus used it so that he could go beyond the philosophy of vengeance it expresses. It's important at a time like this to remember the words which, according to Matthew's Gospel, Jesus actually used. He said, "You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer. If anyone slaps you on the cheek, turn the other one towards him." Actually, it is this question which should define Christianity. It's a clear statement of non-violence and compassion. So I would just like to ask, why is it so difficult for those of us living in a Christian country to take the revolutionary step forward that Jesus was offering us? Now, turning the other cheek is not easy. Perhaps the natural reaction to events like those in Woolwich is to look for some kind of vengeance. Lock them up, bring back the noose, send them back to where they came from. But turning the other cheek is possible. The way the Norwegian people reacted to the atrocities committed by Anders Breivik shows how it can be done. Given that many people accept the view that the war against terror is a struggle between Christianity and Islam, surely, as an historically Christian country, it is the road that we must take. I chose that one in particular because it was the one script that I've done where people rang in and said, what a great talk that was. Can we have more like that, please? You get very little reaction when you're working on the radio. I've got more involved in other aspects of radio since I got involved in doing this. And we all talk about the listener because we have no idea who's actually listening to us, or most of the time we never get any reaction at all. And I thought it might be useful for you to just hear something about what a thought for the day is actually like. So those are the kind of topics that I was covering until fairly recently, where basically I just chose the topic probably 2 or 3 days beforehand, and then put it before the editor on the day of the actual event, the day before the event. It has now evolved as a slot, mainly since Emma Britton, who I think was, of all the presenters I've worked with, was in many ways the best. She wanted something that would fit it more closely, tightly into a program. It's now shorter. We're now only allowed 200 words. And the aim is that it has a close relationship to the content of the program. To make that happen, I'm now given a rundown of the content at about midday, the day before the broadcast. That was basically how things were going into lockdown. And since lockdown, because basically we're not allowed to go into the studio anymore, we've had to pre-record our script. That's actually easier than it sounds. I mean, what I actually use Zoom to record it. I just record the thing on Zoom and then put it out as a sound file. So once it's been recorded, once it's been approved, you then record it and email it to the producer the day before the broadcast, which means in the morning I can just lie back and listen to myself on the radio, which is nice actually. As I said, Emma, who I really rated very, very highly, as I'm not going to get into talking about each of the different presenters that I've worked with, but Emma was one of the nicest and easiest to work with. I particularly like the fact that she had a West Country accent. I thought that helped a lot. So some of the topics that I've now done in response to things that were going to be in the programme were things like collecting Thornbury Food Bank, the ladies in Bristol City Council issuing blue badges, which is a personal thing of my own since I'm a blue badge holder, St Peter's Hospice and the debate about assisted dying, the Bristol Young Heroes Award, school strikes for climate change in Bristol, how lockdown is bringing neighbours closer together, the Marmalade Trust, which I think only exists in Bristol and surrounds, and the Western Pens Pals project. So stuff that's much tighter to actually specifically about Bristol. Okay, so I'm running quite fast. The challenges involved. I think one of the key things is that you have to have some sort of confidence that you're in a position to be able to talk for Quakers. I'm not sure that, I think a lot of Quakers would be reluctant to do that. When I was your representative on Bristol Churches Together in Greater Bristol, I found out that the then Bishop of Bristol thought he could speak for the entire Christian community. I think that's an extraordinary thing to think personally. But you do have to have some sort of, I think, belief, some clarity that when you're speaking for yourself as a Quaker, and some sort of some confidence that your particular views are fairly mainstream within the Quaker tradition, if that is possible. You have to be capable of writing to a tight deadline. I mean, I've been paid for writing for years and years. I'm not a journalist, but I'm very used to writing to tight deadlines. One of the challenges, and I've not always been good at this, I have to say, is getting to the studio on time. It was a great relief to me when I went back to find out that I had an extra hour to get there. And getting to the studio on time, you're expected to be there 15 minutes before you actually broadcast. And then there's the challenge of actually reading out your script. And I'll link that to the listening to yourself afterwards. There's also the challenge of getting home and your wife telling you how badly you've read it. To the extent that, as a good friend of mine who is a professional voice actor, he's actually in the Archers, I got him to give me a lesson on how to give the emphasis right in reading things out. The biggest challenge is actually reading within a time limit, because I tend to read far too quickly. I rush it all and I lose the emphasis. And the biggest challenge of all is finding a balance between expressing your faith and the BBC's interpretation of balance. Now, I have to tell you, friends, that I had done some work with the BBC before, which is one of the reasons I was willing to take the job on, in a completely different capacity. I did some work for the management part of the BBC, so I knew something about the organisation. The BBC has a particular take on what balance and impartiality is. Now, I will tell you, perhaps in my spiritual journey, the most important thing I've ever done that made a big change to how I see myself and the world was a visit I made in 2008 with Sabeel to visit Christians in Israel and Palestine. The deal that you get with that is I think it's a subsidized event, essentially. It's very cheap for what you're doing. You spend 10 days going to talks. In that particular instance, we were in Nazareth and Jerusalem, and we actually spent a couple of nights in Bethlehem as well. And just seeing about the position of Christians in Israel and Palestine. The position of Christians in Israel is shite, basically. And I think people outside don't understand that. There are good reasons, I think, why mainstream Jews don't like Christians. I mean, what have we done in the last 2,000 years that would both face have existed that would make them like us? I think that's an important point to get across. And basically, they're quite like having Christian tourists there and whatever, but they'd rather their state was completely and purely Jewish. And I felt, the deal that Sabeel do with you essentially is you go back and you tell people about what you've seen. The majority of people at the conference were Americans, and they were over the moon in 2008 because Obama had just been elected as president. And I felt, as a Labour Party member, I felt, well, that's how I felt when Blair was elected. And you may be in for some disappointment. But I felt, well, there's no real problem. I can go back. I do Thought for the Day on Radio Bristol and just do a Thought for the Day about it. Little did I know, the first time I tried to do a script about Christians in Israel and Palestine, I spent half an hour arguing with Tim Pemberton, who at that time was the editor-in-chief of Radio Bristol, basically ran the station. But he said, Eddie, if I didn't know better, I think you were saying that Jews don't like Christians, which is actually when I should have said this thing about how, and what have we done in the last 2,000 years that would make them love us? And I thought I'd won the argument. So my wife and I then went off for a drink, and I got rung at about 10 o'clock at night in the pub saying, well, in the bar would be a better way of putting it, saying, Eddie, there's been a mistake, it's not you tomorrow. If you like, you can use that script some other time. And that's when I kind of realized, actually, the Americans who've been warning me, it's actually really difficult to say things about, to speak truth under Israeli power, were right. And I think that there always has been a problem about that. When I did the script about settlement goods, I was doing it on a Monday, which meant I had to track Tim down on a Sunday and find him and get the script approved. So I read it out to him, and he said, Eddie, I'm going to have to read that word for word on a Word file. Can you send it to me, please? And then he got back to me really late at night, saying, Eddie, I've made a few changes to the script. It will be okay. He basically said something along the lines, it's gone to higher authority. And he didn't mean, he meant the legal department. It didn't mean God. I went into the studio that morning, not knowing what I was being allowed to say. And I really didn't approve of the changes he'd made. I've been careful to talk about Zionists rather than Jews. But I was talking about settlers. And he changed where I talked about settlers being, Zionists being settlers. And I've chosen not to use the word Jew, because by no means all Jews are Zionists. he changed it to Jew, and I was unhappy with that. So I think it's difficult. There is this whole issue about understanding impartiality, and I think it's a problem for anybody of faith. I mean, they want us to talk because we give a particular spin on things, but there are limits to which they feel that it's within their charter that you can actually say. So, for example, during elections, you can't really give away who you might be supporting, that sort of thing. I think that's the biggest that's the challenge I've found biggest. I mean, there are lots of challenges in there. I've exchanged ideas with Nikki, who's the person who actually produces the program most of the time nowadays, about how it's going to go in future. And I'm told that they're looking forward to having people back in the studio as soon as possible. So we won't have to pre-record it and all that sort of stuff, which I think would put some people off and doing the role. It actually makes it much more, you really have to have some sort of IT confidence to be able to do that. So I think those are the main challenges. Writing is a challenge for many people, I think. So what does the role involve? I think it does involve writing skills. It involves finding the right voice. And that voice thing it's a combination of feeling comfortable that what you're saying is going to go down okay with most friends in Bristol. And also that what you're going to say will actually be broadcast. Writing, there's the technical thing of writing to a tight word count. And actually, I found it easiest. I lost 100 words. Now we're only allowed 200. I found it easier to do that than because as a writer, I tended to stray off and have more than one topic in my scripts. If you've only got 200 words to play with, you're only really dealing with one idea. And there's the whole thing of meeting the deadline. And the deadline to get the script approved and so on. That can be a little, that can grab your attention anyway. And there's this whole thing about performance skills. I had done a little bit of broadcasting beforehand. The first time I was ever on local radio was when I lived in Cambridge, and I got roped into giving a psychologist view about Orville the duck and his relationship with whoever his manipulator was, and that was meant to be funny. So that was the first time I was actually on radio, yeah, I mean, I have done other broadcasting since. I mean, the first time I was on Radio Bristol was actually when it was becoming clear, when it was just after 9/11, actually. I was assistant monthly meeting clerk at the time with some responsibility for public statements, and Radio Bristol wanted a Quaker Voice about how we should respond to 9/11. So Muggins was the guy who got to do that on a Sunday. And that was interesting. You have to speak very clearly and very confidently with some belief in what you're talking about. And you have to go slowly and speak more clearly than I'm speaking at the moment. There's the whole thing of pacing the text, because to get the words across properly, you actually need to get emphasis right and vary your text to have shading in it. You do need team working skills. You need to be able to get on with people. And I've always found actually that the people at Radio Bristol are incredibly easy to get on with and very welcoming. I mean, so they ought to be. You're doing it for free, basically. And they're always very supportive. And as I say, they give us a free meal every year. And they do give us some expenses. To begin with, I used to not take the expenses because I didn't actually, I mean, it's notional what you're being paid. I mean, I guess it's meant to cover your petrol and getting to the station, into the place. But they do look after you, and they say very nice things about you. And I think it's quite important to not lose your temper when people are editing your work. to recognise that they know more about broadcasting than you do, even if you've been doing it longer than they have. I think that it is really important. And Quakers are not always the easiest people in the world to get on with. Anyway, I hope that gives you a flavour of what's involved. And I'd like to think it might encourage one or two of you to accept a nomination if we ever get that far, and so on. As I say, I've been doing it. I'm quite happy to be coming to the end of doing it. It's been a big part of my life. How many years is it now? A lot of time. It's almost 20 years. It will be, I think it will have been 19 and a half years when I finally handed my pen. But so I hope that gives you a feel about it. And I just find, one of the things I've got out of it is I find I love radio. I just love listening to the radio, I always have done. My wife has also been on a breakfast show as well. She had a spell when she did the papers, which does now go out in the 7:45 slot. And there have been times when we've been on the same day and so on. And she has the same challenges about what you can and can't read out and so on, particularly during an election time and so on. When we were on holiday at one point, we met someone who, I can't remember his name now, but was someone I would recognise off the telly, who said he loved radio because the pictures in your head are better than the ones you see on the screen. So I really love doing it. So, friends, any questions you'd like? We've got about 15 minutes, I think. I'll stop the share now. If you'd like it, I'd be very happy to share that. How do I do this? I would share the screen if I don't get out of this. There you go. Sorry about that, friends. Do go ahead, and I'm here to answer questions. Gina, go ahead.
As a fan of radio myself, and a fan of Thoughts for the Day or Thoughts for the Week, I'm so very glad to have heard your talk, Eddie. One question I'd like to ask you, do you listen to Thoughts for the Week? That's one question. But the other is, do you ever talk with have the opportunity to talk with any other broadcaster who does Thoughts for the Day or Thoughts for the Week?
I don't know Thought for the Week, actually, but so I haven't listened to it. You only get to meet the other thoughtists at the Christmas event. They do have a summer event as well, and it's interesting it's a good thing to do, is to actually have an opportunity to talk about the joys and whatever the opposite is, the joys and challenges of doing it. Yeah, it's nice. We do meet sometimes, but not very often, I have to say. I spend a lot of time talking to other broadcasters, and I like to think I've got friendships within the other Radio Bristol presenters and so on. I have been on other Radio Bristol programs. I've been on the Sunday program a few times. In fact, my younger daughter was on once with me, and I got interviewed where I sort of chose some records and stuff on a Sunday program, and that was fun. I've been on John Darville's program a few times, once or twice actually. John Darville's always in the studio when I go in, always in the newsroom, getting ready to go into the studio. He's been consistent. He's been doing the next program after the breakfast show, but as long as I've been on the breakfast show. And we always say hello, and I like to think that we might be friends to some extent. Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
One or two of the other people who do Thought, Stuart, the guy one of the guys who now works at the cathedral is someone I know. Anyway, Stuart Granger? Is that right? No, it's not that. It begins with a T anyway. I know him through my work with Bristol Kairos and so on. So yeah, I mean a bit, but we don't get together very often, you know. And I'm very keen to listen to Radio Bristol Thought for the Day. I mean, it's quite often my wife and I will be driving around and it's on, and I'll just listen to it and give my thoughts on how well the person's done it. Would I have done it like that? Does that help?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. I'm encouraged to try and listen to Radio Bristol now and again.
Okay. Well, I'll actually be on in a week's time. I'm actually my next slot. I actually missed a slot for the first time because of my fall. I should have been on a couple of months ago, but I'm on again next Friday morning at 8:45. And we always have that in our. We always have the fact that I'm going to be doing it in our news slot at Hallfield, and I think I've finally got it across to most Hallfieldians. I don't know what I'll be talking about until the day before.
Can I use the opportunity now to ask you if there's a way of getting a number of your books to me? I'd like to.
Oh, sure.
Other people have them.
How many would you like, Sheena?
Can I start with a dozen?
No, I haven't got that many. Like I said, 3. If you give me an address, I'll put them in. Which means
I'll pay for the postage. Whatever you think is a good number to let me have.
Okay, where would you like them sent, Sheena?
6 Lipgate Place.
Okay, I'll get them off over the weekend if that's okay.
Thank you.
I won't charge you for them.
Well, I can give a contribution to whatever.
Well, the charity I particularly support is Campaign Against the Arms Trade.
Yes, I certainly will.
Okay. If the book is available at the bookshop, the Friend's House bookshop as well.
Right, okay.
I don't know how many copies they've got. But,
well,
it's the wonders of,
I will let other people know.
Yeah, it's the wonders of short-run printing. I mean, my elder daughter is involved in publishing, and I remember very briefly chatting to her that I'd ordered 50 copies. And she said, well, do they do print runs of 50? She was used to print runs of thousands, you know. And I'm not intending to print anymore because you know, I'm not going to update it and make it 2005 through till 2019. But it was an interesting thing to do, actually write turning into a book. It was a friend of mine who, what I do is I always post a link to my thoughts of the day on my Facebook page. There's a friend of mine from years back who sort of said, Eddie, why don't you produce a book of your thoughts? So I did. And it was really interesting reading through it all and editing it and writing the bits that went. With most of them, I have an introduction that sets the context, and then there's also something afterwards where I comment about it. So it's a kind of interesting reflection on what was going on in the world during those.
Are there any thoughts, any subjects, Eddie, you think, after thinking about them, no, I wouldn't be allowed to say that on the radio?
Well, I said the ones I've had problems with have all been about Israel. But I've learnt my lesson on that one. I think I'm beginning, and I have to say, I'm not, you know, I really liked working with Tim Pemberton, and I like the man a lot, but he had a particular take on what the BBC permitted and not. Israel would be the one, and obviously during a lead up to an election, you can't say anything party political. Not that I would anyway. because that's not what I'm there for. Although in another context, I'll certainly talk to you about party politics. There's a kind of, I think for Quakers, there's a particular difficulty in terms of, I think our particular take on Christianity dates back to a time when there was no real difference between politics and religion. And as a Quaker, I find it very hard to differentiate between politics and religion. I think they're both issues of faith, actually. And they both actually in an important way define my being. I think for a long time, I just defined myself as a socialist. And I came into Quakerism because reading history about the 17th century, when Quakerism founded, Quakers and socialism actually had shared origins. They come out of the same mess that was the English Republic, essentially. The same melting pot.
That's rather spooky, really, because my next statement was going to be that I am a very strong member of the Quaker Socialist Society. And you said about that socialist in that sense, and I think, to me, my Quakerism and socialism go so close together that I would it's disapproved by some friends.
I would identify myself as a Christian socialist. I think that's what I am. I didn't identify myself as a Christian until I actually visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, where, now I need to unpack that bit because it's a mess. It's a disgrace. It's falling apart because the stewardship of it is shared between all the different faiths, different denominations who use it. And I came out of it thinking, this is appalling. We are in front of the Muslims and the Jews, and we really need to impress those people. And if we can't do any better than this, we really need to work on this. And I realized I was using the word we. And from that, that's how I eventually got into being our rep on Churches Together in Greater Bristol, which is one of the other things, aspects of Quaker service I've enjoyed the most and learnt the most from. Well, I'll expand on that, Shirley. I think you don't know what you are until you know what you aren't. Seriously. If you get to find out about other denominations, and you can see what's different about them from you, then you have a clearer view of what you are. So I remember going along to a Churches Together event. I can't remember what the excuse for it was, at Woodlands, where one of the people who I regarded as a really good friend of mine through that work was going through a rough time. Others stood around him and held their hands up, hoping to cure him. And I thought, what's this about? And then it happens that I then I then drove off to Woodbrook and was suddenly amongst my own people. And it's that business of actually knowing where you're, finding your home amongst, I was Quaker Life Rep for a while, both, and that allowed me to meet Quakers who weren't in my own area meeting, and I didn't have all the stresses and strains of the arguments that go on within your own meetings and whatever, and just gloried in our Quakerness. And so, any more questions?
So many.
Is anybody interested in taking on the role? In an ideal, whenever I hand a role over, I like to have a phased handover, as it were. And I'm I've talked to Nick, I've exchanged emails with Nikki about this, and she knows that I'm leaving at the end of the year. And she says that she would, but they do take new people on quite regularly. And she says that she's happy to work with someone quite closely to get them ready to do it. So
what about you, Graham?
yes, Graham would be good, I think.
Have you ever had a woman? I'm not putting forward myself, by the way.
I don't know.
Have you ever had a woman Quaker?
I don't know, because the friend who did it before me was David Mowat, and I don't know who did it before him. Many of the Thoughtists are women. And frankly, I think it would, one of the things that people think they know about Quakers is that we're more woman friendly than most of the other denominations. And I was once at a Churches Together meeting where somebody from the United Reformed Church said, well, we were the first to have women ministers. He said, with the possible exception of the Quakers. I then pointed out to him, well, Quakers don't have ministers, so how could we have had women, female ministers? I mean, the reality is women have played a bigger role in shaping our denomination than any other. And, I think it would be very appropriate if it was a woman. But, I mean, I wouldn't restrict our nominations committee to finding a woman. But I think it would be great if it was. And frankly, most of the people you'd be dealing with at Radio Bristol would be women anyway. Yeah.
It was just a question.
Go ahead. I know, but I mean, I think it'd be very appropriate if it was a woman who took over. I have nobody in mind, incidentally, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a great thing for me to do, and as I say, it has meant occasionally people I know stopped me in the street and said, "Hey, that was good today. I enjoyed that." Up the good work or whatever.
A woman Quaker who comes to my mind, who has just recently retired, would, I think, make a very good fit, and that is Christine Wilmot.
Well, she took over from me at our Churches Together. She's now a Churches Together rep. I think she'd be really good, actually. I saw her yesterday, actually. I did the last piece of paid work I ever did was some work for Yate Town Council about them becoming a more age-friendly. And they held their first age-friendly festival yesterday. So I went along to that and had a quick word with Chris. Yeah, I think she'd be really good. But it's not up to me, is it? I mean, I was on nominations at one time, but I mean...
She stands down from being clerk of area meeting noms at the end of this year, so...
Possible, isn't it? I think she would be good because she's good with words, and that I think that's the most important thing, that you have to feel confident about that you can use words, and you can and actually I think the business of learning how to broadcast comes with experience. I don't know whether I emphasize that one of the worst things is actually listening to yourself. It's horrible hearing yourself. Because I always recognize the fluffs and the mistakes, and I've never been known to get through a script without making a mistake. Reading the wrong word or blurring words together and whatever. But, and it's really unpleasant. It's like looking at yourself in the mirror, if you're me.
Or me.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that's been useful, friends. What's the next topic, Ray?
I'd say.
Oh, we're next week we're going to be listening to. It's going to be on David Saunders, who couldn't be here this week, is going to be supervising, and I hope doing the work of streaming the Swarthbook lecture for those of us who missed it to listen to. And because it's roughly an hour long itself, we're going to be discussing it the week after. So we've kind of got two things spread over the next 2 weeks.
Right.
So you all need to listen in to next week to participate. Or maybe you, of course, maybe not. Maybe you've enjoyed the Swarthmore lecture already. I don't know. Christopher, have you listened to it yet?
Well, yes, I listened to it when it went out, so, but I should listen to it again. It's very good.
That's I know the chap since he was a very young friend, and I knew his mother very well, Mary Penny, who is a scion when it comes to children and young people's work. She wrote the book type of thing. So she's just retired from all that type of thing as well at the moment. So it'd be just good to hear him again.
But so that's a little bit different from our normal pattern. But normally, as today, we have a single speaker, and then we just all join in afterwards. I must say, I think people are a bit quiet today. I don't know. It's really interesting to hear somebody who's done something like Book for the Day. But I couldn't actually think of anything I wanted to ask after I'd listened to you, and that makes me feel I ought to be asking something. But actually, what it means is that you've covered everything that I wanted to know in your talk.
I'll try to be less controversial. I think doing it today probably teaches you not to be controversial.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. That business about balance. I've always found that actually the BBC want you to be a bit controversial, within limits. They don't want to. They have enough trouble keeping their license anyway. And one has to remember that the BBC is very small compared with some of the bigger players in broadcasting nowadays. Netflix has more to pay on a program, on a series, than the BBC has as an overall budget. They are very strapped for cash. And what I didn't say, one thing I didn't say is that Radio Bristol was one of the very first local radio, was one of the BBC's first ventures into local broadcasting. And they're kind of aware of that. I remember Tim Pemberton used to brag about it, about how it was actually somebody from Bristol, because Bristol's a major centre for the BBC. There's more goes on in that building than almost anywhere else in the country. Possibly London and Manchester might rival it, but because of the wildlife stuff and whatever, there's a heck of a lot goes on there. The BBC, the Bristol people are very proud of Radio Bristol, but they are doing it on a shoestring nowadays, which is why they don't pay people, basically. When people joke about how much the BBC pay people, they're really not joking. The work I did for them previously was actually something, this was before I got involved in Thought for the Day, was something whereby they were encouraging people to leave the BBC. There's a very strange career path whereby a lot of people historically, a lot of people end up working in quite menial tasks at the BBC because they've written in to Blue Peter saying they'd like to be a Blue Peter presenter. And they actually keep a register of the people who write in like that. And when they're old enough, they contact them and say, would you like to come and work for us? And there has been a big problem with people leaving the BBC because it takes over your life, essentially. And people stay there far longer than they should do, and they could be earning a lot of money working elsewhere. The particular project I was working on at that time was when they were encouraging producers to set up their own companies, and basically they were kind of encouraging people to leave the BBC and become a bit more freelance and maybe work for others as well. But I don't know, the BBC, you know, we all love the BBC, and it's that business. Think of it's the issue about something that's internationally. We feel we can criticise it because we own it. I feel is what happened with British Rail, if you know what I mean. I mean, I think most people I know, I mean, you know, my friend who works on the Archers has a great sort of feeling. He works for lots of other people, but he has a great feeling, very protective about the Beeb. You know, there's a kind of loyalty towards it that I don't think you find with other broadcasters or other media. And I think the project I was involved in for them was a very real one. There were people who did need to leave the BBC and get a life. It was the curious meeting people who were literally starstruck. A lot of their self-affirmation came out of the fact that they worked with Russell Harty or things like that. And yeah, it's a very interesting organisation to work with. There's one guy there who I regard as a friend who does, Joe Lima, who does the programme before the breakfast show, who is paid a pittance basically and just does it for love.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
I think we've come to a natural conclusion. So thank you, Eddie, for a very, very interesting talk. And no doubt you'll go on to do other things. And
well, I'm trying to cut down on what I do now. I'm of an age where I've started having big falls and whatever. I think well, thank you very much, friends.
okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.